Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with more hip hop news and, of course, one of those Mount Rushmore topics. Now, I was listening to the 85 South Show podcast with, and they discussed the Mount Rushmore of Southern rappers. Now, this is just Southern rappers, but not rappers that like moguls, kind of like Birdman and Jay Prince and people like that, Jermaine Dupri, but just rappers that had the most influence and impact in the South, which is a lot of names that you could throw in there. And I heard a lot of names like Outkast or Andre 3000 or Lil Wayne, Juvenile, even Project Pat. And I heard DC mention Field Mob, which is interesting to me. But him being from Atlanta, Field Mob had a different feel back down there. They, it was more regional rap, even though they made the big stage, but for a little while. But it was just interesting to hear Field Mob because did have a couple of songs that I did like, but I didn't think about them for this discussion. And a lot of people didn't want to put Outkast or a group in there because it's individuals, but some people say you can um, split one person into two for that matter because there's, people like Outkast had so much impact. It's difficult for some people to separate. But for me, it wasn't. By being from the South, I definitely had an opinion of my Mount Rushmore, and but it's very difficult because just picking four people with the most impact, 10 would be a lot easier because I can easily pick 10 and not be messed up about the order or anything like that because they're all impactful. But if you're only gonna pick four, I had to pick the four that are most impactful to me. And my four is simple. So my four is Lil Wayne, T.I., which doesn't get enough credit. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Project Pat, and then Andre 3000. Because I picked Wayne because Wayne's run and impact throughout hip hop, even with the early Cash Money days, from back that thing up all the way until now, which last album wasn't really impactful, but his overall career, especially for Southern rappers and Southern artists and Southern fans, meant a lot because he kind of put the South on the map in a different way, especially in the pop world that other artists weren't able to do. Him, especially the Carter Three, was selling 1 million records in the first week. That was major for hip hop. Hip hop probably never get enough shine like that again. He had a Taylor Swift like run back then. He was able to be putting on all these different conversations and rooms that he wasn't being able to put before, or anybody in hip hop for that matter, even a Jay Z, wasn't able to cross over like that, until he got with Beyonce and was able to be able to put in those rooms. And even with Beyonce, they don't put him in those rooms because of the racism that's in music now. But Lil Wayne somehow circumvented that, and even to this day, he still gets a lot of credit for the rap ability that he had because of collaborations and just the unbelievable skill set he had. He made the world respect the South in a different way, especially from other demographics and uh, other demos. But he made it more palatable for other demos and things like that. You could play rap and parties and things like that that they weren't usually playing them in. So he has so much impact. You have to put Lil Wayne up there. Ti, I think is one of the most consistent rappers in the South, even more so than Lil Wayne because he didn't have a Wayne like run ever in his career, but he's been consistent even to this day. Even though he does comedy now and he really hasn't put out an album in a few years, but every time he puts out a project, it's high quality. It's high features, good music that he puts together, and he doesn't have a bad project. Now, if you want to say the first album was probably lackluster, I'll give you that. But other than that, all his projects are top tier. His rapping ability never declined, even though he was going through different legal issues and other things behind the scenes. He always kept a high quality performance. And that Paper Trail album was when he was going through his legal issues, can arguably is his best album to date, back in '08, which was a phenomenal rap year for hip hop. And I did a podcast on that before, how phenomenal 2008 was for rap albums, especially during the time when I was in college. I remember that year. That was phenomenal. But Ti doesn't get enough credit for having one of the best pens, not only in the South but in hip hop history. He can go bar for bar from anybody. His intellectualism, his vocabulary, his delivery, his flow. his cadences, all of those things are top tier. And you can put him on any feature with anybody, and he's going to deliver. He showed you that with Justin Timberlake or whoever you want to put him on a song with Mariah Carey. He's done it all, but he doesn't get that credit. But I think Ti is what Nas is to the East Coast, in my opinion. Um, he isn't considered the best because that distinction goes to Lil Wayne, similar to Nas. He wasn't always considered the best because that distinction with the Jay-Z, but Nas was always more consistent than Jay-Z, as Ti was always more consistent than Lil Wayne, especially later in his career. But yeah, I always have to put Ti up there because of his singles and what he meant to hip hop. He took a stand in hip hop. He spoke on social issues. He wasn't just rapping to make words sound nice. He actually rapped with a meaning. So that's one thing I put over him over Lil Wayne and probably most Southern artists is because he had really rapped with a purpose. And he was an activist, so to speak, later in his career. But so you have to put Ti in there. Project Pat is a interesting one, probably for most people, but being from Memphis, knowing growing up with Project Pat's music, it was so underrated, and I didn't understand it as much until I got older. Now, Project Pat now is into church and things like that, so big up to Project Pat for that. But when he was out rapping, it was raw talent. And before all these drill rappers came out, he was original drill rapper. He actually talked about a lot of things that the rappers talk about now, but he put it in a more elegant way. He was more he had a better vocabulary. He had a more pop sound to him than they did, even though he didn't have a pop look. And I think that's where his career probably went wrong. He was out earlier than he should have because he was out today. He would be bigger than an NBA young boy. He would be bigger than a Travis Scott or Lil Uzi Vert, I believe, because he would have had the 3-6 machine behind him, but he would also have the advantage of the streaming era. Because a lot of people listening to his music probably bootlegged it. They didn't go out to the record stores. They didn't support like they were supposed to. So, but nowadays with the streaming era, they would have to support through streaming. And there's not a lot of bootlegging going on. So he would have been more successful in this era than any other era. But unfortunately, he was in the era of the, late, mid and late 90s and early 2000s. But if you don't know about Project Pat, your favorite rappers do. Some of the best rappers of all time have sampled his music and his songs and even borrowed some of his lyrics, whether it be Drake, Cardi B, J. Cole, 2 Chainz, Lil Wayne. They've all sampled Project Pat or used his lyrics. And that's just a few artists. There's way more than that. But for sake of time, I'm just going to say those artists. And I talked about before, he's a part of that 3-6 Mafia tree. So he had great production coming up with DJ Paul and Juicy J, and then had great others around him like Gangsta Boo and Lil Chad and Crunchy Black and all other artists like that. So he comes from a stable background. But like I said, he grew up in the wrong era where he didn't get the respect he deserved because he was ahead of his time of what artists are doing today, especially the gangster rappers. And lastly, of course, Andre 3000. His skill set, even though he really only released one solo project, that Love Below album, that was a double with Big Boys, the speaker box. He left a lot on the table as far as a solo career, but as far as his career with Outkast and what he's contributed musically and lyrically, and the features that he had later in his career, you have to put him up there. Now, one of his two of my favorite features from him, and I talked about this before, is that the art of storytelling part 4, which was on the DJ Drama album, and then also the album that he had with Kanye called Donda. I think it was called Donda. It was on the Donda project. Life of the Party is the song. So those two are the best. When you listen to those, you'll understand why Andre 3000 is heralded as one of the best lyricists, and not only the South, but in hip hop history. Just because his thoughtfulness, his intellect, the way he can make words sound, and the way he puts ideologies together and makes these common trends into a questionable reality. He's one of the rare artists that can do that. You could tell that he really puts thought into his verses and not just making words rhyme and sound nice. I always talk about that, rapping with a purpose. He's one of the strongest rappers that raps with a purpose, and he's one of the most lyrical, for a reason, just because he has the skill set going all the way back to the early 90s with the early Outkast days. but he stood the test of time. If he releases a verse today, it's going to be impactful. It's going to be considered a verse of the year. It's going to get a high, credit. And that's what this Mount Rushmore topic is about. It's not just about your skill set, but how consistency, where is your consistency like? What is your longevity? He has all of those great things. So while he hasn't given us a lot of quality or a lot of solo projects, but his work with Outkast in totality has to be considered, and the features he's done later in his career, all the way from, the Walk It Out remix and things like that, the International Players Anthem, all of those different great verses that he has. You can put those together into a montage, and it's some of the best music that you can't tell the story of hip hop without. So you have to put Andre 3000 in there. So I have Lil Wayne, T.I., Project Pat, and Andre 3000 in my Mount Rushmore of Southern rap music. Tell me, well, who is in your Mount Rushmore of Southern rap music? And until next time, see you next time.